At exactly 7:12 on a crisp Tuesday morning, I stood at the register of the local coffee shop, holding a small paper cup that cost $2.89. The cashier, a young woman named Sarah who always recognized my morning routine, tapped her screen and smiled politely. Then her smile faltered. She swiped my card a second time. Another quick, sharp beep echoed across the counter. "I'm sorry, Mr. Walker," she said, looking genuinely embarrassed for me. "It says your card was declined." I frowned, taking the plastic card back. "That's strange. Try it again, please." She did. Another beep. Declined. Behind me, a young man in a tailored suit shifted his weight impatiently and checked his watch. A woman farther back in line let out a loud, theatrical sigh. I reached into my leather wallet and pulled out my backup card, a secondary account I had maintained for over 15 years. "This one should work fine." Sarah inserted it into the chip reader. The machine processed for 3 long seconds before displaying the same blunt message: "Transaction denied." "I'm really sorry, Mr. Walker," Sarah said quietly, her voice dropping so the customers behind me wouldn't hear. I could feel a sudden heat rising into my cheeks. It wasn't about the $2.89. It wasn't even about the cup of coffee sitting on the counter between us. It was that subtle, invisible shift every older adult dreads. The exact moment strangers begin wondering if you've grown confused, forgetful, or incapable of managing your own life. Before I tell you my story, please leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you're new here, welcome to Honorline. I swallowed my pride, giving Sarah a small nod. "It's all right, Sarah. I'll come back another time." "I can cover it for you today, Mr. Walker," she offered softly. "No, thank you." "You're very kind, but I'll sort it out." I left the untouched coffee on the counter and walked outside into the cool Indiana morning air. Commuter traffic rolled down Main Street exactly as it always did. The world moved forward, completely indifferent to the tiny humiliation that had just occurred inside. I pulled my phone out of my jacket pocket and dialed my son, Derek. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Morning, Dad." His voice came through the speaker, crisp and hurried. "Everything okay?" "My cards were just declined at the coffee shop, Derek," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Both of them. Did the bank have a system outage this morning?" There was a brief, uncomfortable silence on the line. Then I heard Derek let out a slow, rehearsed sigh. Yeah, he said. "We canceled them." I actually thought I had misheard him over the sound of passing cars. "You what?" "We canceled your credit cards, Dad." My grip tightened around the phone. "Why on earth would you do that without talking to me?" Derek's voice stayed measured, perfectly calm, almost as if he were reading from a script he had practiced. "Dad, you're 70 years old. You've been forgetting small things lately. Vanessa and I talked about it over the weekend, and we decided it was time to simplify your finances." "I haven't forgotten anything," I retorted, my pitch rising before I could catch myself. "I've paid my bills on time for 50 years, Derek. I spent 38 years supervising multi-million-dollar highway construction projects for this state." Before Derek could answer, another voice spoke up in the background. It was my daughter-in-law, Vanessa. She wasn't whispering. She made sure her voice carried clearly into the microphone. "I told you he'd get angry and argumentative, Derek," she said. Then she took the phone directly from his hand. "Hi, Arthur." She let out a short, dismissive laugh, the kind of laugh people use when they want to make you feel unreasonable for standing your ground. "Look, Arthur," Vanessa continued, her tone dripping with patronizing sweetness. "If you need groceries or money for small errands, just ask us before you spend a dime. It'll be so much easier for everyone." Everyone. Not me. Everyone else. For a long moment, I stood frozen on the sidewalk. I looked through the glass window of the coffee shop at people opening laptops, sliding cards through readers, buying pastries, and continuing their morning exactly as planned. Mine had just been dismantled over a $2.89 charge. 38 years as a civil engineer had taught me one fundamental rule about structures. When a bridge cracks, you don't slam it with a sledgehammer to test its strength. You stand back, inspect the foundation, and figure out who loosened the bolts. I could have shouted into the receiver. I could have argued. Instead, I forced my chest to settle and spoke 4 simple words. "I understand, thank you." Then I hung up. I didn't drive back to my quiet ranch house. I got into my truck and drove straight to the downtown branch of First Merchants Bank. I have lived in this same Ohio town for 36 years. When my wife Linda and I bought our brick house on Maple Street in 1988, interest rates were nearly 10%. We worked overtime, budgeted every quarter, paid off our mortgage early, and built something solid. We raised Derek under that roof. We marked his growth on the wooden doorframe in the pantry, celebrated every Christmas, and built a life rooted in independence. Linda passed away 4 years ago from pancreatic cancer. Some mornings, even now, I still wake up and instinctively reach across the cool sheets before remembering she isn't there anymore. Grief doesn't disappear. It just becomes a quiet, permanent weight you learn to walk with. After I retired from engineering, I settled into a routine that gave my days structure. Tuesday mornings were always my favorite. Coffee at the local diner, reading the printed newspaper, dropping by the bank if I needed petty cash, and occasionally meeting an old work colleague for lunch. Simple, predictable, peaceful. Derek lived 20 minutes away in a modern subdivision with Vanessa and our 2 grandchildren, Emma and Jacob. I loved those kids more than life itself. Derek called every Sunday. Vanessa organized holiday meals. From the outside, we looked like a tight-knit family. Maybe I'd even allowed myself to believe we were. About 8 months ago, Derek had come over to help me set up a new smartphone. "Dad," he had said, resting a hand on my shoulder, "everything is moving online now. Let me help you modernize your banking so you don't have to worry about mail scams or missing bills." I had trusted him. He was my son. He set up online account access, linked my checking account to a mobile app, created passwords, and updated security preferences. "It's just protection, Dad," he had reassured me. Vanessa had agreed, adding, "There are so many predators targeting seniors these days." Sitting in my parked truck outside First Merchants Bank, the cold reality began to crystallize. It hadn't been about protection. I walked into the bank lobby. Susan Reynolds, the branch manager who had managed my accounts for nearly 15 years, looked up from her desk and smiled instantly. "Good morning, Arthur," she greeted warmly. "How are you doing today?" "I've been better, Susan," I said softly. Something in my tone made her smile fade. "Is everything okay?" "I don't think it is," I answered. "I need to look at my accounts." 5 minutes later, I was sitting across from Susan inside her glass-walled office. She pulled up my file on her terminal. As she scrolled through the records, her expression shifted from professional courtesy to quiet concern. She stopped typing, stared at the screen, and then looked up at me. "Mr. Walker, what exactly were you told about your accounts?" she asked carefully. "My son told me he canceled my credit cards this morning," I replied. Susan hesitated, her fingers hovering above the keyboard. "I'm seeing several major administrative changes made to your primary profiles." "What kind of changes?" She slowly turned the computer monitor toward me. "The primary mailing address on your checking, savings, and line of credit was updated 2 days ago," Susan pointed to the screen. I leaned forward. The address listed wasn't my brick house on Maple Street. It was Derek's home in Oak Ridge Estates. "The primary contact phone number was also changed," Susan continued. "It's listed as Derek's cell phone, and the recovery email address belongs to Vanessa." My chest felt tight, as if someone had wrapped a steel band around my ribs. "When did all of this happen?" "The contact changes were authorized on Friday afternoon," Susan said quietly. "And replacement cards for all accounts were issued and mailed yesterday." "Mailed where?" "To the updated address in Oak Ridge Estates," she replied. I stared at the blue lighting of the monitor. I never requested replacement cards. I never authorized an address change. Susan folded her hands tightly on her desk. "Mr. Walker, did you sign any administrative forms over the weekend?" "No." She didn't hesitate. She picked up her desk phone and dialed an extension. "Kevin, could you please come down to my office right away? I have an urgent account audit with Mr. Walker." 10 minutes later, Kevin from the bank's fraud services department joined us, carrying a digital tablet. He introduced himself politely and pulled up the back-end transaction logs. "Mr. Walker," Kevin began, "did you grant anyone power of attorney or third-party administrative access?" "No," I said. "My son helped me set up my online banking profile on my phone 8 months ago. He had my master password because he created it." Kevin and Susan exchanged a quick, knowing glance. It wasn't dramatic. It was the silent, practiced look of professionals who had seen this exact scenario play out far too many times. Kevin tapped his tablet screen and turned it toward me. There are electronic authorization forms attached to your profile update from Friday. They include digital signatures. I leaned in closer. At the bottom of the form was my name, Arthur H. Walker, written in a digital cursive font. I didn't sign that, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I've never seen this form in my life. Can digital signatures be generated through linked email accounts? Kevin asked, rhetorically, looking at Susan before turning back to me. If someone has administrative access to your email and online banking, they can authorize profile updates without you ever receiving an alert. Susan leaned forward, her voice filled with genuine empathy. Mr. Walker, before we draw conclusions, Kevin and I need to review every transaction, setting modification, and alert preference on your account over the last 8 months. 8 months? I asked. Yes, Susan nodded. Situations like this rarely happen overnight. Kevin quietly added a sentence that made my stomach sink into a cold abyss. They happen one small step at a time, Mr. Walker. Disabling notifications first, changing recovery details second, adjusting limits third, and finally taking full control. I sat in that quiet office staring at the digital copy of my forged signature. The declined coffee charge at 7:12 a.m. hadn't been an isolated mistake. It wasn't about $2.89. It was simply the final brick in a wall my own son had been quietly building around my life for 8 months. And as I sat there in the bank, I realized with chilling clarity that I had no idea how much of my freedom had already been locked behind it. The silence inside Kevin's office was heavy, broken only by the hum of the server tower underneath his desk. On the screen, the evidence was laid out with cold, mathematical precision. We ran a complete timeline audit on your main checking and money market accounts, Kevin said, tapping his tablet to bring up a series of red-flagged line items. It didn't start with the card cancellation yesterday, Mr. Walker. The structural changes began almost 8 months ago. I adjusted my glasses, leaning closer to the monitor. What changes? First, your transaction alert thresholds, Kevin explained, pointing to a setting modified back in November. Previously, any withdrawal or charge over $100 sent a direct text message to your phone. Someone logged into your web profile and raised that threshold to $5,000. That's why you never received a text when smaller amounts were moved. I felt a faint chill settle in my stomach. And then? 3 months ago, Kevin continued, a daily debit spending limit of $500 was placed on your primary checking account. On paper, it was categorized as a precautionary fraud protection measure. But the secondary authorized user, your son, Derek, was given administrative override authority. I stared at the screen, letting those words process. A $500 limit. For nearly 40 years, I had managed state highway construction budgets worth tens of millions of dollars. I had negotiated contracts with steel suppliers, managed union payrolls, and audited complex engineering bids. Now, my own son had quietly decided I needed a child-proof lock on my own pension money. Is any money actually missing, Kevin? I asked softly. Did they transfer funds out of my savings? Susan Reynolds, who had been sitting quietly beside me, spoke up. No, Arthur. Every dollar of your principal balance is still intact. That's what makes this situation so unusual. This isn't a case of outright theft. Then what is it? It's an incremental takeover. Susan answered, choosing her words with extreme care. It's a systematic pattern designed to restrict your independence until you become entirely reliant on them for daily transactions. Once your cards are declined and your alerts are redirected, you have no choice but to call Derek every time you need to make a purchase. I slowly sat back in the leather armchair. Increasing control. Not robbery, control. Memory after memory began slotting together like pieces of a bridge deck. Last Thanksgiving, when Vanessa had insisted on taking my wallet out of my hand at the restaurant, smiling sweetly as she paid the bill, saying, "Oh, Arthur, you've done enough for this family. Let us handle it." I had thought it was kindness. Or last Christmas, when Derek had spent 2 hours in my home office offering to organize my tax records, asking strangely specific questions about whether my house deed was clear and if I had updated my estate beneficiaries since Linda passed away. I had assumed he was just looking out for my future. Now, I realized he had been taking inventory. "What do we do now, Susan?" I asked, my voice flat and quiet. "From a banking standpoint," Susan replied, "we can freeze online access immediately, restore your original mailing address, and issue new cards that will be delivered directly to this branch for you to pick up in person. But legally, you need to speak with your attorney." By 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was parked outside a modest brick building near the county courthouse. The painted gold letters on the glass door read, "Daniel Mercer, Attorney at Law." Daniel had been a close friend for 30 years and had drafted Linda's and my wills back in 2012. He wasn't a flashy attorney. He drove an old Ford pickup, kept paper case files stacked neatly on his oak desk, and believed in straightforward legal honesty. He listened without interrupting for nearly 40 minutes as I explained everything: the declined coffee, the phone call with Derek and Vanessa, the changed bank addresses, the $500 spending cap, and the forged electronic signatures. When I finished, Daniel folded his hands over a yellow legal pad and let out a long, quiet breath. "Arthur," Daniel said gently, "I'm glad you came to me today before confronting Derek again." "Why?" I asked. "I'm his father, Daniel. Part of me wants to drive over there right now and demand an explanation." Daniel shook his head. "Because if you confront him right now without knowing the full scope of what they've done, he'll become defensive. He'll tell you it was all a misunderstanding, he'll blame Vanessa, he'll apologize, and then he'll quietly move whatever plans he has deeper into the shadows." "What plans?" Daniel reached into a file cabinet behind his desk and pulled out a land registry property index on his computer screen. "Has anyone mentioned your house recently, Arthur? Has Derek or Vanessa talked about real estate, downsizing, or moving?" I frowned, thinking back over the past few months. Vanessa brought it up at Easter. She handed me a glossy brochure for a new retirement village on the west side of town. She said, "Wouldn't it be nice not having to worry about mowing the lawn, Arthur?" I told her I liked mowing my lawn. She just smiled and dropped it. Daniel adjusted his reading glasses. "I checked the county records before you walked in. 3 weeks ago, a local real estate agency pulled a public deed query on your property at 412 Maple Street. The request didn't come from a buyer. It came from an agent who frequently works with Derek's firm." My pulse slowed down, turning cold and heavy. "He's trying to sell my house?" "He can't sell it legally without your signature or a court-appointed conservatorship," Daniel corrected. "But the fact that he's obtaining market valuations means he's preparing a financial profile." "Arthur, have they asked you to see a doctor recently? Have they brought up memory tests or cognitive evaluations?" "Vanessa asks me every time she visits if I've remembered my blood pressure pills," I recalled, my grip tightening on the armrests of the wooden chair. "She asks it loudly, usually in front of the grandkids or neighbors." "That's called laying a foundation," Daniel said grimly. "If they can convince people, and eventually a probate court, that you're becoming forgetful or incapable of managing your affairs, they can petition for emergency guardianship. And if they get guardianship, they get control of your estate, your bank accounts, and your home." The room went completely still. Outside the window, a lawnmower hummed in the distance, an ordinary sound in an ordinary world that suddenly felt miles away. "What do I do, Daniel?" I asked. "For the next few weeks," Daniel said, looking me squarely in the eye, "you are going to play the role they expect you to play. You are going to act like a quiet, compliant, 70-year-old father who didn't notice a thing." "You want me to pretend I don't know?" "I want them to believe their plan is working," Daniel said firmly. "People become careless when they think they've already won. While they think you're clueless, we are going to build an unbreakable record of the truth." He handed me a blank blue leather notebook from his drawer. Every time Derek or Vanessa calls, Daniel instructed, write down the date, the time, and exactly what they say. Every time they make a decision for you without asking, write it down. Keep every receipt. I'm going to bring in Evelyn Brooks. She's the top elder law attorney in the state, and we are going to audit every document connected to your name. I took the blue notebook into my hands. The leather was smooth and cold. "And Arthur," Daniel added softly, "do not show anger. Anger makes you look unstable to outsiders. Calm, documented facts are the only weapon that works in a courtroom." That evening, I sat alone at my wooden dining table. The house was quiet. The sun was setting over the backyard, casting long, amber shadows across the lawn where Derek used to play catch when he was 9 years old. At 6:15 p.m., my phone buzzed on the placemat. It was Derek. I picked up the blue notebook, opened a fresh pen, pressed the speakerphone button, and took a deep breath. "Hello, Derek," I said, keeping my voice completely level. "Hey, Dad," Derek said, his tone casual and relaxed. "Just calling to check in. Are you doing okay after this morning? I know you were a little upset about the cards." I looked at the blank page in front of me, wrote down Tuesday, 6:15 p.m., and answered softly, "I'm fine, son. I was just surprised, that's all." I heard Vanessa's voice in the background, followed by Derek's relieved exhale. "I'm glad you see it that way, Dad. We really are just looking out for you." "I know," I lied quietly into the receiver. "I know you are." "I'm glad you see it that way, Dad," Derek's voice repeated through the phone speaker. "We really are just looking out for you." "I know," I lied softly into the receiver, watching my handwritten note on the blue leather pad. Tuesday, 6:15 p.m. "I know you are." Over the next 4 weeks, I became the exact version of the aging, passive father Derek and Vanessa expected to see. I didn't argue when Vanessa dropped by to help organize my kitchen pantry, casually moving my daily medications from the countertop to a top shelf where I had to stretch to reach them. I didn't raise my voice when Derek called every Friday to ask if I needed him to buy my groceries, reminding me loudly that carrying heavy bags was getting risky for a man my age. Instead, every time they spoke, every time they made a decision for me without asking, I wrote it down. June 12th, 2:15 p.m. Vanessa called the local pharmacy to request that my prescription refills be redirected to her address. June 18th, 10:30 a.m. Derek stopped by with a handyman to take measurements of my back porch, casually mentioning to the worker that the house would be on the market before winter. June 24th, 4:00 p.m. Vanessa handed me a printed brochure for the Oaks retirement community, stating in front of my neighbor Walter that I was finding the stairs too difficult to manage. I kept my entries factual, precise, and completely devoid of anger. As an engineer, I knew that emotional complaints could be dismissed as confusion, but dated, chronological evidence was an unbreakable wall. By mid-July, Daniel Mercer introduced me to Evelyn Brooks, the senior elder law attorney he had mentioned. We met in Daniel's quiet office on a humid Thursday afternoon. Evelyn was a sharp, perceptive woman in her late 60s, with graying hair and an unflinching gaze. She didn't offer empty sympathy. She opened a thick black accordion folder and got straight to work. "Mr. Walker," Evelyn began, "reviewing the bank audit logs provided by Susan and Kevin, what we have here is a textbook case of incremental legal disenfranchisement. They are building a narrative that you are cognitively declining so they can petition for emergency conservatorship." "Can they actually win that in court?" I asked. Evelyn looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "Only if you remain unprepared, but we are going to make that legally impossible." Over the next 3 hours, Evelyn, Daniel, and I restructured my entire estate from the ground up. First, I executed a formal revocation of any and all prior administrative access, digital signatures, or implied power of attorney granted to Derek or Vanessa. Second, we established an irrevocable living trust. I transferred the deed of my brick house on Maple Street, the house Linda and I had bought in 1988, directly into the trust. Under this structure, Evelyn explained as I signed the legal documents, you retain absolute lifetime occupancy and control, but the property cannot be sold, leveraged, mortgaged, or transferred by anyone, including your son, without the explicit, written approval of a licensed independent corporate fiduciary. Even if someone claimed you were incapacitated, 2 independent board-certified physicians would have to confirm it, and control would go to a professional trustee, never to Derek. "So he can never sell my home out from under me," I said, lifting the pen. "He can't even list it on a napkin," Evelyn replied firmly. Then came the breakthrough we had been waiting for. 2 days later, Daniel called my cell phone. His voice carried a rare, sharp edge of professional satisfaction. "Arthur, come to my office right now," Daniel said. We got the smoking gun. When I arrived, Daniel slid a printed email thread across his desk. A private wealth manager at Derek's investment firm mistakenly CC'd my administrative email on a correspondence chain, Daniel explained. Derek was attempting to pre-qualify for a bridge loan to finance a commercial real estate deal Vanessa wanted to enter. I looked at the top of the page. The email sent by Derek to his broker contained a subject line that made my chest constrict. Subject: Maple Street property. Equity: Dad doesn't know yet. I read Derek's own words printed in black ink. We are finalizing the administrative updates on his banking profile now. My wife is handling the mailing address transition. He's 70 and completely reliant on us for technology. He won't question the card cancellations. Once the conservatorship filing is approved next month, we can list the Maple Street house immediately to secure the equity for the deposit. Dad doesn't know yet. 4 words that destroyed any remaining hope I had that this was a well-intentioned mistake. It wasn't about protecting me from scams. It was about using my home as collateral for their ambition. I folded the paper carefully and placed it inside the blue leather notebook. Are you going to file charges? Daniel asked quietly. No. I answered, feeling a profound, cold calm settle over me. A courtroom trial will drag on for years and ruin my grandchildren's lives. I want them to face the truth right here, in the house they're trying to sell. What do you have in mind, Arthur? I'm inviting them over for Sunday dinner, I said. And I want you, Evelyn, Susan from First Merchants, Kevin from Fraud Services, and Judge Henderson to be sitting at my table when they arrive. On Sunday afternoon, the weather was warm and clear. The scent of my wife's rose bushes drifted through the open windows of the dining room. At 4:45 p.m., Daniel, Evelyn, Susan, Kevin, and Judge Walter Henderson arrived quietly through the side door. They took their seats around my old oak dining table, the same table where Derek had done his homework as a boy. At exactly 5:00 p.m., the front door opened. Derek and Vanessa walked in carrying a covered casserole dish and a bottle of wine. Vanessa was laughing, her voice echoing down the hallway. "Arthur, we brought that low-sodium lasagna you like." Vanessa froze in the doorway of the dining room. The smile vanished from her face so fast it looked painful. Derek stepped up behind her, holding the bottle of wine, his eyes widening as he looked at the 6 people sitting silently around the table. "Dad?" Derek blinked, shifting his weight nervously. "What? What is going on here? Who are these people?" I stood up from the head of the table, adjusted my glasses, and looked my son directly in the eye. "Sit down, Derek," I said softly. "Vanessa, put the lasagna on the counter. We have 38 years of family history to discuss." The dining room fell into an immediate heavy silence. The warm scent of my wife's rose bushes drifted through the open windows, contrasting sharply with the sudden freezing tension that gripped the room. Vanessa stood frozen in the doorway, her hand still clutching the covered casserole dish. Derek, holding the bottle of red wine, looked as though someone had stripped away his voice. "Sit down, Derek," I repeated, my voice remaining soft, steady, and entirely devoid of anger. "Vanessa, set the dish on the side table, please." "Arthur," Vanessa began, her posture instantly shifting as she tried to force a warm, concerned smile onto her face. "What is this? Is this some kind of intervention? If you're stressed about your finances, we were only trying to—" "Set the dish down, Vanessa," Judge Walter Henderson said firmly from the foot of the table. His voice carried 40 years of authority from the county probate bench. Vanessa's smile faltered. Slowly, almost mechanically, she set the dish on the sideboard and walked to the table. Derek followed, pulling out 2 empty chairs across from Susan and Kevin. I looked at my son. His forehead was slick with sweat, his confidence evaporating under the quiet, deliberate gazes of 6 people who knew the exact truth. I reached for the blue leather binder resting in front of me and opened it to the first page. 8 months ago, I said, looking at the handwritten entry. My online banking credentials were reset without my knowledge. "Derek, you told me you were helping me set up a new smartphone." "Dad, I was!" Derek blurted out, leaning forward. "I was just trying to protect you from online scams. You told me yourself technology was getting confusing." On November 14th, I continued calmly, ignoring his interruption, The alert threshold on my accounts was raised from $100 to $5,000. That meant I would never receive a text message if smaller sums were moved or if administrative settings were changed. Kevin from Fraud Services pulled a printed log from his folder and slid it across the wood. The change was executed from an IP address registered to Derek Walker's residence. Derek stared at the paper. He didn't answer. On March 3rd, I said, turning the page of my notebook, a daily spending limit of $500 was placed on my checking account. My primary mailing address was changed to Oak Ridge Estates. My credit cards were canceled. Vanessa folded her arms tightly, her chin lifting in sharp defense. We did that for your own good, Arthur. You've been getting forgetful. You forgot to return a library book 2 months ago. You mixed up a dentist appointment in April. We are your family. We were stepping in before you ruined yourself. I paid the library fine the next morning, Vanessa, I said quietly. And the dentist appointment was rescheduled because the clinic had a plumbing leak, not because I forgot. Evelyn Brooks leaned forward, resting her hands on the table. Mrs. Walker, under Ohio law, forgetting a library book does not constitute legal or cognitive incapacity. Furthermore, changing an individual's primary address and intercepting replacement credit cards without written power of attorney constitutes unauthorized account manipulation. We signed authorization forms, Vanessa snapped. No, Kevin corrected smoothly, opening his tablet. Digital signatures were generated using Mr. Walker's linked email account, an account accessed from your home network. Mr. Walker never signed those documents. The bank's fraud unit has already flagged those submissions as unauthorized. Derek's head snapped toward his wife. Vanessa, you told me Dad agreed to those forms when you brought him coffee that afternoon. You said you talked to him. Vanessa's cheeks flushed a dark mottled red. I mentioned it to him. He nodded. I assumed he understood. Mentioning something to a 70-year-old man while he's mowing his lawn is not legal consent, Vanessa, Daniel Mercer said dryly. The room went silent again. The illusion Derek had built in his mind, that he and his wife were a unified team gently guiding an aging parent, began to split wide open right in front of him. Derek, Evelyn said softly, when did you first decide your father could no longer manage his own life? Derek looked down at his hands. I thought, after Mom died, he was lonely. He seemed quieter. And then Vanessa said, he stopped, rubbing his face with both hands. Vanessa said we needed to get ahead of it before he spent everything or got taken advantage of. He didn't spend everything, Derek, Susan Reynolds said gently, pulling up my account ledger. Your father has lived meticulously within his pension for 4 years. His accounts are perfectly balanced. I closed the blue notebook with a soft thud. I could have forgiven the cards, Derek, I said, looking directly at my son. I could have forgiven the $500 limit. I could have even forgiven the embarrassment at the coffee shop on Tuesday morning when my card was declined over $2.89. Derek flinched. Dad, what I cannot forgive, I said, reaching into the binder and pulling out the printed email thread, is being treated as an obstacle to be cleared away. I slid the printed paper across the oak table until it rested directly between Derek and Vanessa. Derek picked it up. As his eyes scanned the text, his breath hitched. Subject: Maple Street Property Equity. Dad doesn't know yet. We can list the Maple Street house immediately to secure the equity for the deposit. Derek stared at his own words printed on the page. His hands began to shake violently. You contacted a real estate agent 3 weeks ago, Derek, Daniel Mercer said, his tone grim. You were preparing a financial profile to use this house, the house your parents paid off through 30 years of hard labor, as collateral for a commercial bridge loan. Vanessa stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. We were doing that for our family's future, for your grandchildren. That equity is just sitting there doing nothing. That equity, I said, my voice rising, just enough to command the entire room, is my life. It is where your mother planted those roses outside that window. It is where your height was marked on the pantry doorframe every birthday. A stranger sees property, Vanessa. I see my home. Dad! Derek's voice broke completely. Tears spilled over his eyes, dripping onto the printed email. I swear, I didn't realize. You stopped asking questions, Derek, I said, the pain finally bleeding through my quiet exterior. You stopped seeing me as your father, and you started seeing me as a problem to manage. You let your wife convince you that taking away my dignity was an act of kindness." Vanessa opened her mouth to argue, but Judge Henderson raised his hand. "Vanessa, I advise you to remain silent. If this matter proceeds to a formal probate inquiry or a fraud investigation, every statement you make in this room will be noted." Vanessa swallowed hard and sank back into her chair, her face completely pale. Derek buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting us. I made a terrible mistake." "Yes," I said softly, looking at my son with a mixture of profound sorrow and firm resolve. "You did. But mistakes have consequences, Derek." Daniel Mercer opened a fresh manila folder and laid out 3 copies of a legal document. "This is what we are here to execute today," Daniel announced. Daniel Mercer opened the fresh manila folder and laid out 3 copies of a legal document across the old oak dining table. "This is what we are here to execute today," Daniel announced, his voice echoing with calm, unshakable authority. Derek wiped his wet face with the back of his sleeve, staring at the papers through bloodshot eyes. "What is it?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Is it an eviction? Are you taking away my inheritance?" "This isn't about punishment, Derek," I said softly, reaching across the table to touch the corner of the folder. "It's about protecting everyone, including you." Vanessa leaned forward, her arms still tightly crossed, though the defensive arrogance in her posture had vanished. "Protecting us from what?" Evelyn Brooks took over, her sharp professional tone cutting through the quiet room. "Under the terms of the newly established Walker Family Irrevocable Trust, Arthur Walker retains absolute lifetime occupancy and operational authority over the Maple Street house. The property deed has been transferred directly into the trust." She looked at Derek, making sure every word landed clearly. "Neither you nor your wife nor Arthur himself can sell, mortgage, leverage, or list this property for personal gain. If Arthur ever genuinely becomes incapacitated in the future, control over the estate will not pass to a family member. It will be managed exclusively by an independent licensed corporate fiduciary." Derek blinked, a mix of shock and confusion washing over his face. "So, no one in the family can touch the house?" "No one," Evelyn confirmed. "No individual can quietly take over. The safeguards are designed to eliminate unchecked power completely." Melissa looked down at the table, her jaw tight, but for the first time all afternoon she didn't attempt to argue. "You really don't trust us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I looked directly at her. "I don't trust anyone with unchecked power, Vanessa. Not you, not Derek, and not even myself when grief or pressure clouds my judgment." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. "That's why we build safeguards instead of relying on assumptions." Daniel turned to the next section of the document. "Furthermore, Mr. Walker has revoked all digital credentials, secondary administrative access, and implied authorizations previously linked to his bank accounts. Full account authority has been restored to Mr. Walker, with automatic fraud monitoring managed directly by First Merchants Bank." Kevin from Fraud Services nodded in agreement. "All future administrative changes will require in-person, notarized verification at the branch." Derek swallowed hard, staring down at the polished wood. "I understand. I deserve that." "There is one final matter," I said, pulling a smaller blue folder from my binder. "This concerns the future." Both Derek and Vanessa looked up, expecting another legal boundary. "I have established a small charitable foundation," I explained, looking around the table at Susan, Kevin, Daniel, Evelyn, and Judge Henderson. "It will be funded through a portion of my annual pension overflow, and it will sponsor free financial literacy and technology safety workshops for seniors at our local public library." Susan Reynolds smiled warmly. "And First Merchants Bank has already agreed to partner with Arthur to host those sessions." "When Derek first offered to help me set up my phone," I said softly, "I realized how easy it is for people my age to feel overwhelmed by modern technology. Many seniors give up control simply because they're afraid of looking foolish or becoming a burden. I looked my son straight in the eye. I want to make sure no other parent hands over their dignity just to keep the peace. Derek buried his head in his hands once more, letting out a long, shuddering breath. Dad, I don't know what to say. You're building something good out of what I did. Linda used to say that when something breaks, you don't throw it away, I answered gently. You rebuild it stronger, and you make sure the foundation is solid. Judge Henderson stood up, placing a heavy hand on Derek's shoulder. Son, your father just handed you a second chance that very few men in your position ever get. Don't waste it. An hour later, the guests prepared to leave. Susan and Kevin shook my hand warmly in the hallway, promising to follow up on Tuesday regarding my new credit cards. Daniel and Evelyn gathered their briefcases, giving me a quiet nod of respect before stepping out into the cool evening air. Judge Henderson lingered at the front door for a moment. He looked back at Derek, who was quietly helping clear the dinner dishes in the kitchen, then turned to me. You handled that like an engineer, Arthur, Walter said with a small, knowing smile. Measured, precise, and built to last. I learned from the best, Walter, I replied, glancing at the framed photograph of Linda resting on the hallway table. After everyone left, the house returned to its familiar, peaceful quiet. Derek stayed behind to help finish wiping down the dining table. Vanessa had already gone home, exhausted and subdued, promising to reflect on everything that had been exposed. As Derek set the last clean glass into the cupboard, he walked over to where I was sitting by the kitchen window. He stood awkwardly for a moment, shifting his weight like a young boy who knew he had disappointed his father. Dad, he asked softly. Yes, Derek? Can I come over next Saturday, just to help you mow the lawn? He caught himself quickly, adding, only if you want me to. I'm not trying to take over, I want to spend time with you. I looked at my son. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a quiet, earnest humility. The road to rebuilding trust would be long, and it would require consistent action over time. But for the first time in 8 months, the door was open for the right reasons. I smiled faintly. I'd like that, Derek, but I'm driving the mower. You can handle the weed trimmer. A real, genuine laugh escaped Derek's chest. The first true laugh I had heard from him in years. Deal, Dad, deal. Almost exactly 1 year later, on a crisp Tuesday morning, I pulled my pickup truck into the parking lot of the local coffee shop. The morning sun was just rising over Main Street, casting a warm amber glow across the brick sidewalks. I walked inside and stepped up to the counter at exactly 7:12 a.m. Sarah, the same cashier who had been there a year ago, smiled brightly when she saw me. Good morning, Mr. Walker. The usual? The usual, Sarah, I replied cheerfully. She poured the fresh coffee into a paper cup and rang up the total. That'll be $2.89, sir. I reached into my wallet, pulled out my primary credit card, and inserted it into the chip reader. A single, clear, pleasant beep echoed across the counter. The screen flashed green. Approved. No hesitation, no decline, no embarrassment. Just a simple, ordinary transaction. Sarah handed me the cup with a warm smile. Have a wonderful day, Mr. Walker. You too, Sarah. As I turned toward the exit, the glass door opened and Derek walked in wearing a plain flannel shirt and work boots. He saw me, smiled, and reached for his wallet. Hey, Dad, Derek said softly. Let me get your coffee today. I looked at him, then down at the receipt in my hand, and finally back up at his eyes. I gave his shoulder a gentle, affectionate pat. I've got it, son, I said with quiet pride. I've got it under control. Derek nodded, his smile widening, not the confident smile of a man trying to manage someone else's life, but the grateful, respectful smile of a son who had finally learned what it meant to honor his father. I know you do, Dad, Derek said softly. I know you do. We walked out together into the bright morning sunshine, not as a father being managed, and not as a son trying to take control, but as a family standing on a foundation of dignity, boundaries, and mutual respect. Before I go, I'd like to leave you with one final question. Have you ever had to set a firm boundary with someone you love in order to protect your own dignity? Leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching Honor Line, and I'll see you in the next story.